The annual Detroit Engine Expo was no ordinary event. It was a gathering of the most powerful minds in the automotive industry, a place where innovation and wealth collided under the dazzling lights of high-tech stages and glass-walled exhibition halls. CEOs in tailored suits paraded through the venue with entourages of assistants, while engineers displayed gleaming engines polished to perfection. The air buzzed with anticipation, deals, and the faint scent of machine oil. For many, this was a battlefield of prestige. But for Marcus, a humble mechanic, it was a chance to witness the machines he had only ever read about in magazines. Marcus, 34 years old, had grown up in a small Atlanta neighborhood where opportunity was scarce. His father had run a modest garage where the cracked concrete floors were stained with oil and the walls lined with mismatched tools. Marcus had learned engines not from textbooks, but from hours of trial, error, and persistence. He knew the hum of pistons like others knew music. Though poor, he carried within him a natural genius, a gift that had gone unnoticed outside his community. Attending the expo wasn't easy. He had saved money for months, skipping meals just to buy a ticket. When Marcus walked into the exhibition hall, he felt the contrast immediately. Around him, sharply dressed professionals in designer clothes carried briefcases and expensive watches. His boots were worn, his shirt faded, and his calloused hands told a story of endless work. He noticed the stares, the quiet smirks, the raised brows. Yet he pressed forward, ignoring the weight of judgment. To him, this was not about appearances but about engines. The machines displayed on platforms gleamed under bright lights, their designs futuristic and ambitious. He gazed at them with a passion few could match. At the heart of the expo stood the star attraction, a multi-million-dollar prototype engine unveiled by Titan Motors, a giant in the automotive world. It was a masterpiece of design, boasting new hybrid systems and advanced fuel efficiency. But as the CEO, Richard Kingsley, presented it to the crowd, the engine faltered. The lights flickered, the rhythmic hum broke into awkward stutters, and then silence. Gasps echoed through the hall. Engineers scrambled forward, whispering frantically and pressing buttons, but the engine remained lifeless. Cameras zoomed in, capturing every moment of this unexpected failure. Richard, a 55-year-old CEO with graying hair and a commanding presence, clenched his jaw in frustration. He prided himself on perfection and control, and this failure was an insult to his name. His voice, deep and sharp, cut through the air. "Fix it now!" A team of engineers rushed in, tools clattering, screens lighting up with diagnostics. For 30 minutes they worked, sweat dripping, but nothing worked. The machine refused to respond. The once proud prototype sat dead, mocking its creators under the unforgiving spotlight. Murmurs rippled through the audience, and whispers of doubt began to rise. Among the restless crowd, Marcus stepped closer. His sharp eyes scanned the engine, noting every detail. He could almost hear the silence of its broken rhythm. It wasn't arrogance that pushed him forward, but instinct. A mechanic's intuition, born of years listening to broken cars and breathing in the language of steel and oil. He leaned slightly, trying to catch the sound, the faint clicks, the hidden misalignments. In that moment, he saw what the polished experts had missed. A small timing gear misaligned, a valve cracked under strain, overlooked in the engine's flashy presentation. But Marcus wasn't invisible. As he leaned in, Richard noticed him. The CEO's lips curled in disdain. "And who are you?" he demanded loudly, his voice laced with mockery. Marcus straightened his posture and replied calmly, "Just a mechanic." The crowd chuckled. Richard smirked. "A mechanic? This engine costs more than your entire life. You think you can do what my engineers cannot?" His words dripped with scorn, designed to belittle. The room filled with laughter, people shaking their heads. To them, Marcus was nothing but a poor intruder in a world far above his station. Marcus didn't flinch. He had faced mockery before, from those who thought poverty meant ignorance. He kept his eyes steady on the engine and spoke again, softer but firm. "I can fix it. The laughter grew louder, echoing through the hall until Richard raised a hand to silence the crowd. His pride, bruised by the engine's failure, turned cruel. "Fine," he said. "Let's entertain ourselves. Show us, mechanic. If you're so sure, prove it." The challenge was issued not with respect but as a spectacle, a chance to humiliate Marcus in front of thousands. The engineers hesitated, but Richard waved them aside. Marcus walked forward, feeling every eye on him. His boots echoed against the floor, heavy yet steady. As he approached the machine, he felt the magnitude of the moment pressing down on him, but he refused to let it crush him. He had repaired engines under flickering garage lights with no help but his own 2 hands. This was no different, only bigger. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing strong forearms scarred from years of labor, and placed his hand gently against the machine as if greeting an old friend. The silence in the hall grew thick as Marcus began his inspection. He didn't rush. He touched the metal, listened to the faint echoes, and studied the gears with careful eyes. Unlike the engineers who had swarmed the machine with tablets and sensors, Marcus relied on his senses, his intuition sharpened by experience. He moved with confidence, though he knew the weight of judgment pressed against his back. Richard crossed his arms, watching with disdain, certain the man would fail and further prove his superiority. But Marcus shut out the noise, focusing only on the rhythm of the engine's heart. Within minutes, Marcus identified the issues. The timing gear was off by just enough to disrupt the cycle, a mistake buried deep within the assembly. The valve had cracked from strain, hidden beneath layers of design. These errors were small but fatal, overlooked because the machine had been built for show, not substance. Marcus reached for the tools at hand, simple ones compared to the advanced gadgets around him. He loosened bolts, adjusted alignments, and carefully swapped the faulty piece. His hands moved with precision, guided not by wealth or training, but by instinct honed through endless nights in his father's garage. As Marcus worked, the crowd grew restless. Some whispered doubts, others scoffed openly. "He'll break it worse," one man muttered. "This is embarrassing," another said. But a few watched with quiet intrigue, noticing the steady focus in Marcus's eyes. The way he moved wasn't random. It was purposeful, almost artistic. For every sneer, there was also a curious gaze, drawn to the possibility that perhaps this man wasn't ordinary after all. Even the journalists, cameras still rolling, leaned closer, sensing the weight of the unfolding story. Finally, Marcus tightened the last bolt and stepped back. He wiped his hands on his apron, breathing steadily. The silence was absolute now, the crowd holding its breath. Marcus looked toward the nearest engineer and nodded. "Try it now." The man hesitated, glancing nervously at Richard, who gave a dismissive wave. With a reluctant hand, the engineer pressed the ignition sequence. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. The tension stretched thin, ready to snap. Then with a low rumble, the engine stirred. Lights flickered, hums built into rhythm, and suddenly the machine roared to life with power and precision. The hall erupted in gasps. The once dead prototype now blazed with energy, glowing under the spotlights, as if reborn. The sound of its flawless rhythm filled the room, undeniable proof of Marcus's skill. Engineers who had dismissed him stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. Journalists scrambled, capturing every angle of the miracle. Richard's face, once smug, turned pale with shock. His pride cracked like the valve Marcus had replaced, leaving him exposed before the very crowd he sought to impress. Marcus had done what wealth, power, and prestige could not. In that moment, the laughter died. The whispers turned into awed silence. And Marcus, the poor black mechanic mocked by a CEO, stood tall beside the roaring engine. He hadn't raised his voice, he hadn't boasted. He had let his hands, his heart, and his gift speak for him. The Expo, built to showcase technology and wealth, had instead revealed something far greater, the undeniable brilliance of a man the world had tried to overlook. The moment the engine roared back to life, the crowd froze in disbelief. Its polished surface gleamed under the spotlights, humming with flawless rhythm, as though the machine itself had been waiting for Marcus's hands to touch it. People who had mocked him only minutes before now found themselves speechless. For an instant, silence gripped the entire hall, broken only by the steady thrum of pistons. The very sound that had symbolized failure moments ago had become the music of triumph. Every eye turned toward Marcus, who stood quietly with grease-stained hands, his expression calm and steady. A murmur rippled through the audience, growing into waves of astonishment. Reporters scrambled to capture the scene, their cameras clicking rapidly, recording history as it unfolded. Engineers who had dismissed Marcus shifted uncomfortably, their faces burning with shame. They had tried everything, yet failed, while the man they had mocked had accomplished the impossible. Some whispered to each other, "How did he see that? How did he know?" Others simply shook their heads in disbelief. For Marcus, it wasn't magic. It was the language of machines, a language he had spent his whole life learning. Richard Kingsley, the CEO, stood frozen. His face, once proud and smug, had turned pale. His reputation was on the line, and in that moment it was clear that he had been humbled before the entire world. He clenched his fists, his jaw tightening, searching for words to regain control of the narrative. But nothing came. The sight of Marcus standing beside the roaring engine was proof enough that power and wealth could not buy true genius. For a man like Richard, used to dominance, the humiliation was unbearable. Yet he could not deny what everyone else had seen. Marcus didn't gloat. He didn't raise his voice or bask in the spotlight. Instead, he stepped back, wiping his hands on his apron, as if this were just another day at the garage. That quiet humility made the moment even more powerful. He looked at the engine with satisfaction, not because it made him famous, but because it lived again. He glanced at the crowd, at the curious eyes staring back, and for the first time he realized that his gift had finally been seen. His whole life he had been invisible. Now the world couldn't ignore him. The journalists wasted no time. Microphones and cameras rushed toward Marcus, their voices overlapping. "How did you do it? Who are you? What's your background?" He blinked, overwhelmed by the sudden attention. For years, no one had cared about his story. Now everyone wanted to hear it. He answered simply, his voice steady and calm. "Engines speak if you listen. You just have to care enough to hear them." His words, though quiet, carried across the hall, sinking into the silence left by his miracle. They weren't technical jargon, but the truth of a man who lived his craft. Meanwhile, Richard finally found his voice, though it was strained with bitterness. This doesn't change anything," he snapped, attempting to reclaim authority. "One lucky fix doesn't make a mechanic an engineer." But his words fell flat. No one laughed anymore. No one shared his disdain. The room that once worshipped his wealth now looked at him with doubt. They had seen his arrogance collapse, replaced by a truth money couldn't erase. Even his own engineers avoided his gaze, ashamed of their failure and his cruelty. Richard's empire of pride had cracked in front of the world. As the tension unfolded, a voice from the crowd rose. It was a senior journalist, known for covering groundbreaking innovations. He pointed at Marcus and said, "That's no lucky fix. That was mastery." The crowd erupted in applause. It began hesitantly, then grew into thunderous clapping that shook the hall. For the first time, the Expo's spotlight was not on a CEO, not on a polished machine, but on a poor black mechanic who had walked in with nothing but his skills and his courage. Marcus stood humbled yet proud as the applause washed over him. The Expo organizers quickly stepped forward, seizing the moment. They invited Marcus onto the stage, urging him to share his thoughts. He hesitated, not used to such attention, but Lucas, his 10-year-old son, who had followed him silently, tugged at his sleeve and whispered, "Dad, you should go." Encouraged by his son's words, Marcus climbed onto the stage. The lights blinded him for a moment, the sea of faces stretching endlessly, but he held his ground. He began speaking softly, telling them about his father's garage, his years of learning by doing, and his belief that machines deserved respect. Every word came from his heart, and every word resonated. He didn't speak as an engineer with degrees or as a CEO with wealth, but as a man who loved his craft. He spoke about long nights spent fixing broken cars for neighbors who couldn't afford expensive repairs, about listening to engines as though they were voices crying for help. The audience listened in silence, captivated. It wasn't a technical lecture. It was a story of resilience, of love, of a man who turned struggle into strength. By the time he finished, the applause returned, even louder than before. Lucas beamed from the side of the stage, his chest puffed with pride. To him, his father had always been a hero. But now, the world finally saw what he had always known. He whispered to himself, "That's my dad," his eyes shining with admiration. For Marcus, that look was worth more than all the applause in the world. He had always worked hard for his family, for his community, never for fame. Yet destiny had chosen this moment to show the world the greatness hidden in humility. And in that moment, Marcus felt something he had never felt before: belonging. The night didn't end with applause. The story spread like wildfire. Journalists wrote headlines that raced across the globe. Mechanic stuns Expo with genius fix. Poor man outsmarts engineers. Heart over wealth wins the day. Marcus's name appeared on screens he had never dreamed of. TV anchors debated his genius. Companies called for interviews, and social media overflowed with praise. Some even called him a modern-day hero, proof that brilliance didn't come with a price tag. His phone buzzed constantly, offers pouring in. But Marcus, overwhelmed, turned most of them down. He didn't want riches. He wanted purpose. Back in Detroit, people sought him out not just for repairs, but for guidance. Young mechanics came to his garage, asking to learn from him. He became a mentor, teaching them not only how to fix machines, but how to respect them. His story inspired students in schools, workers in factories, and dreamers who felt invisible. He had become more than a mechanic. He had become a symbol. In a world obsessed with wealth and status, Marcus reminded everyone that dignity, patience, and true passion still mattered. His story was not just about fixing an engine, it was about fixing perspectives. Richard, meanwhile, struggled to recover from the humiliation. His company's stock dropped as questions arose about their flawed prototype. More damaging than the failure was the public perception, the image of a CEO mocking a poor man only to be proven wrong. The internet replayed the footage endlessly, turning it into a lesson about arrogance. No amount of money could erase the truth. Richard had wanted to embarrass Marcus, but in doing so, he had destroyed his own reputation. His empire of pride had been shaken, and in its place stood the quiet triumph of a man he underestimated. Yet Marcus bore no hatred. When asked about Richard in interviews, he never mocked him back. Instead, he simply said, "Sometimes people forget where real knowledge comes from. I hope this reminds them." His grace only amplified the respect people had for him. He became a voice not just for mechanics, but for all those overlooked because of class, race, or poverty. His story carried hope, that talent could rise from anywhere, that brilliance could not be silenced by wealth, and that sometimes the world needed a reminder that true genius speaks softly, but powerfully. Months later, Marcus returned to the Expo, this time not as a visitor, but as a guest of honor. His name appeared on banners, his words quoted on posters. He stood on the same stage where he had once been mocked, now celebrated. But he hadn't changed his essence. He still wore the same boots, carried the same humble smile, and spoke with the same quiet confidence. As he addressed the new crowd, he reminded them that machines, like people, needed care, attention, and respect. His message was simple yet profound, echoing in the hearts of all who listened. Lucas stood by his side again, older now, but still full of pride. He whispered, "You showed them, Dad. You showed the whole world." Marcus placed a hand on his son's shoulder and smiled. "No," he said softly, "we showed them. Because you believed in me?" The boy grinned, knowing he had been part of history. For Marcus, this was his true victory. Not the fame, not the applause, but the chance to inspire his son and others like him to believe in themselves. His journey had come full circle, from a small garage to the world stage carried by love. The world eventually moved on to new inventions, new machines, and new headlines. But Marcus's story remained, a legend retold in garages, classrooms, and communities across America. Whenever engines hummed and machines came alive, his name was remembered. Not because he was rich, but because he had listened, cared, and dared to stand tall when mocked. His life became proof that brilliance has no boundaries, that even in a world ruled by wealth, the human spirit could still shine brighter. And for Marcus, that was enough. His hands, scarred and strong, had changed not just an engine, but the world.